All right, well, we're ahead of time, and we're probably going to be even more ahead of time. My talk's pretty short. So this kind of dovetails with a few conversations we've already had today, but I'm going to be talking about the economic limits of L2 scaling and what that means. So to start, I think we can all agree that we're primarily concerned about non-custodial use cases. And by that, usually we mean that a person can unilaterally exit the said system. With that said, many L2s that we have constructed today and are being used today have coordinators, liquidity providers, sequencers, and those come under censorship risk as another point of concern. So we've got, for example, Samurai Wallet, where the developers are under legal threat. They obviously ran servers that did coin joins and other coordinated activities. So that was one censorship vector. We have Wasabi Wallet. The default coordinator is gone, and theoretically you can run your own coordinator, but that's under legal threat, and it's questionable who's running those sometimes. Phoenix Wallet, which is back in the US on April 8th, was missing from the US app, the Android store and iOS store, I guess. The best Lightning wallet out there for consumers. So again, what's the use for these L2s if you can't actually access them? And lastly, we have privacy-focused layer 2s like Tornado Cash. These have developers, not central coordinators, I guess. It's a little off-brand, but central development of sorts, and that puts pressure on it, especially with complex systems. So this talk will not be worrying about kind of the thundering herd problem. What if 1 billion people need to get on chain next month or so, like with James's talk or other talks like that. Instead, we're going to be focusing on the censorship case or the failure of the particular L2's liveness. So common examples would be, what if your coordinator unplugs their machines due to a court order, which may happen with like Spark or other kind of state chain systems where things are otherwise self-custodial. And also just kind of, what if the coordinator hates you specifically, like your IP address or you're some minority that's being oppressed? So what do you do then? And how do we think about self-custody in this premise? One digression is we also have to think about, in the background while we're thinking about this, is liveness. We generally seem to be pretty okay as a community with some easy to convey liveness assumptions. So I have some examples here of different degrees. So there's in-flight payments at risk with security parameter T. So for example, in 144 blocks, this HTLC needs to be resolved, or the forfeited ARK UTXOs. There's risk of things like stale balance being posted. So like a challenge response, you can think of this as a fraud proof and this timing out. There's also just whole balance risk where ARK and timeout trees, if you have a VUTXO inside some kind of structure, this L2, and some time passes, even if there's no malicious things happening, suddenly money is handed to another person. That's like another class of risk. I'd say it's qualitatively different. It's not just in-flight payments, but whole balance, and also doesn't involve any act of maliciousness, right? It could easily see cases where a hacker only has limited permissions in the system, and they just wait until the rollover happens to the now custodian. Now the money's gone, right? This is a different class of problem. And there's also, in a lot of these systems, like ARK, timeout trees, Lightning Network, so on and so forth, probably BitVM, where there's this tension, the security parameter tension, where you have how long liquidity is locked up during contention period, contest period, whatever this liquidity is providing, right? And so I think for a lot of people, we can just set it kind of longer and wait because we have small time preferences. So for that, we can just kind of put this aside and come back to, assuming we're okay with liveness constraints, what can we do to remain self-custody? So I think, and others I've talked to think that we should have probably a stronger definition of self-custody in some ways. And one way of talking about it is calling it economic self-custody. So in this construction that you're in, whatever construction you're in, how many Satoshis are needed to become kind of economically relevant for your self-custody? So you can think of this as like some napkin math here. Number one is you have X vBytes required for unilateral exit. I'll get to concrete examples in a second. There's a fee rate in Satoshis per virtual byte, Y, and then you're willing to burn up to some fraction of your balance to exit, right? So you could imagine, let's just go to the specific case, kind of the base case. You want to send a payment, right? You're on L1, you're not doing anything special. You have a payment, a change output. That's with Taproot, that's about 154 virtual bytes. Let's say the mempool is empty, like today. And you're okay burning about third, which is kind of this dust output kind of threshold people talk about is roughly this. And so the kind of economic self-custody amount is 462 Satoshis, or about 37 cents. And so, you know, we're not going to do much better than that. Because if you want to exit your system, which is exiting the current UTXO you're in, this is the best you're going to do. We're not going to be able to, given these ratios and these Bitcoin prices, we're just not going to do any better, right? We're not going to be able to trustlessly, economically self-custody a cent, a tenth of a cent. It's just not going to happen, right? So that's kind of the gray pill there. Now, obviously, fee rates can increase. And so as this increases in monetary amount. And, you know, this is something you really can't control, right? I think I mentioned this. Yes. So we simply can't do better than this base case, aside from bigger blocks. Even if we do this, we don't control what this kind of Satoshis per virtual byte going rate is. We don't know what that is. Like now, it's hard to predict now. We also definitely don't know what it's going to be in the future. And we also can't control the price of Bitcoin, right? One way of making it economically feasible is to crash the Bitcoin price. Suddenly, it's a lot cheaper to hold small balances on chain. So we just don't know how to do that. So with those caveats, we can do some napkin math though. As we get more complex, things get more expensive. So here's some napkin math of a Lightning Network closure with one HTLC with an anchor spend. And so that's 711 virtual bytes at one Satoshi per virtual byte, leading to about $1.71. So the argument would be that if you're okay, if you think the fee rate's going to be one, like just flat forever, then you should be okay with a balance of about $1.71 in a channel. Obviously, as this goes up, this does not hold, right? This gets pretty bad pretty fast. And then even if we're looking at marginal HTLC output, so that's just for like the base case, pretty simple, one HTLC. For every marginal HTLC currently, again, these are all napkin math, right? Currently based on the bolts, it'll be about 319 virtual bytes. And you can see that a marginal HTLC would be $76. And so you can imagine the case where it's not even worth it to actualize a payment under $75 on chain, and you just trim it. So that's not really scaling micropayments. It's not really scaling balances beyond this amount. And then if we get to what effectively, they're timeout trees and channel factories, ARKs, they're all kind of the same thing. They're trees of pre-committed transactions, and the first person to exit, you, the censored person, has to pay for the whole cost going to chain with this entire Merkle proof of your UTXO, right? So you're on the hook for this in this scenario. This is not a thundering herd. In a thundering herd, it's actually kind of okay because on average, it's like 2x overhead or something like that. But no, you're paying the whole way. So even with just 2 layers, it gets pretty bad, right? This is the middle of the road, 15 Satoshis per virtual byte. Now you're up to $50. And then you want to think, okay, what about rollups, right? I don't know the answer to this. But payments still cost vBytes, even when it's live, and then exiting, I don't know, as a rollup developer, you fill this in yourself pretty much. And then let's say you want to do Lightning Network on rollups. Then it's kind of the aggregate of it. And you can imagine, like, not only do you want to do Lightning on rollups, but you want to do a channel factor on rollups. These all aggregate together and make your minimum viable VUTXO value ever increasing. And I mean, ignoring the complexity altogether, right? Which is another thing. Yeah, so yeah, LN on timeout trees on rollups. You can see it just gets more and more incredible in the negative sense. Yeah. And then I guess the exit's 10 BTC as for BitVM based on yesterday. I didn't know how much things cost in reality, but I think that's the real cost there. It's like minimum is 10 BTC, even if you're one of the operators, right? Yeah. So again, I said it was going to be short. Takeaway is the numbers will vary. Do your own research. So don't actually me about what the values are, but we should be communicating things. So thinking about how small can we hold balances that are credibly self-custodial, and humility that a lot of these variables that go into this kind of like hand wave equation are kind of outside of your control. So we have to make estimated guesses and predictions. And also when deploying these, there's just these questions you have to ask what you want to do. So you can opt for more efficient designs where perhaps they're less pleasing than you wanted, right? From an architectural point of view. You could literally say, we don't accept deposits lower than this amount. Like an ARK operator could say, we only accept amounts above, for a tree of this size, above 1,000 sats or whatever that ends up being. You can have a graduated wallet system, which is maybe you just have a minimum deposit and then the rest goes into some charming, balances below this are just dealt with by some custodial solution that scales. That's private. And then once it gets up to a certain amount, then you do a just-in-time splice, whatever, to hop into the real contract. Or you just say, well, if you squint hard enough, it's non-custodial, don't regulate me, and see if that works too. So I have no real answers here, but these are kind of like the way I would be thinking about them as a developer of L2s. So that's all I got. Yeah, questions? Plenty of time. Yeah. Again, going to the miners. Kind of. Yeah. So it'd be the kind of thing, well, they can't steal it, right? So some optimal ZK roll, well, you can't steal it. That's better. How much better? That's kind of everyone does different opinion. Like I'm a little more rosy on it. I had to talk to people who are not rosy on it. What does a regulator think, right? If they say, oh no, we're non-custodial. We have 1 billion people with balances they can't actually pay to get on chain. So really, no, we have some clawback contract in 100 years, whatever, based on whatever laws in their jurisdiction. Okay, I know. Well, what are they thinking about? We get lots of cagey lawyer answers, I'm just going to say. Regulators go after people who are effective custodians when someone. Okay. He says when complaints come, so when do people complain? So is that why samurai people are in like being? Okay. So you think? I know I'm. Okay. So but money. It's to me. I'm not a legal guy. I put some in the same bucket. I'm saying legal risk. How about that? Legal risk. Is that okay? Sure. I'm sorry for being imprecise. So do you not believe custody has any vector on legal risk? Or sorry, on custody regulation risk? Okay. Okay. So I guess your point would be you don't think it'll ever be a risk. Everyone can have 10 billion people can have one Satoshi V2XOs in the same ARK, and the regulators just won't care. Yeah, it's going to take 10 or 20 years before they're. Well, okay.
I think his argument is also that they don't even understand the tacit difference.
I guarantee they don't understand. Right. But I guess
but if they don't understand,
let's say an ARK provider falls over, suddenly they are the single signer on 100,000 Bitcoin of a bunch of dust. Even if users don't complain, I guess the question. Okay, all right. So in that case, you think users complain, then that would fire it off. Okay, that's.
I met someone who used to do crypto at the SEC and left, and she told me that they didn't even know how market makers worked, in
I don't
crypto
really either. So.
I mean,
no. I definitely. It's definitely like it's reactionary, right? Most of the time, but once it happens, it'll probably get. I'm guessing it'll get easier the second time. Like once the first ARK, I'm picking on ARK here just because it's on the top of my head. Once the first operator falls over and suddenly becomes a custodian accidentally, and there's complaints, I feel like it might be easier the second time. I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, I do think it's interesting that almost all designs that we've thought of that are not based rollups have basically centralized sequencers or coordinators or whatever you want to call them. And that's, I think, a particular risk. Oh yeah, a shielded CSV. There you go. But for bridging, it's still, yeah.
Can we go to the BitVM side?
This is the old diagram I'm poking fun at. Not really.
Wait, so I'm just not that familiar. So you're saying that it takes 10 BTC to do what?
So the peg out here, the peg in and peg outs are only in denominations of 10 BTC based on for this scenario, guys. So Ekram's talk yesterday. But my point was more like, even if you're an operator of this system, so you can peg out here, like you have authorization to peg out. The cost to do so is mostly, from what I understand, capital fronting at this point. So it's a slightly different variant on the argument of like, if I only owned 10 BTC period in my life, I don't know if I could peg out unless I get a loan for 10 BTC, front the payment, then get my money back a week later.
Is that really how the bridge works?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm getting nodding from Ekram back there. So
okay.
He had a very good talk yesterday.
Okay. I wasn't here yesterday. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So it's not quite it's not the vByte argument, I guess. It's like a very different argument. You look like you have a question.
What is your company? Sorry.
Spiral.
Okay. What do you do? Is this about that or?
No. So Spiral does not do a bridge. I've worked on, if you want to talk about me now, Bitcoin Core.
Well, I've done. You didn't introduce yourself. So I just.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm a Spiral Wizard, which is before Taproot Wizards, by the way. Got hired before that was a thing. And I work on Bitcoin Core, like mempool policy, interaction with L2s. I've done Lightning work, but not Bolt work. And then I've done element symmetry and things like that. So kind of, yeah.
Hey, Greg.
Is that you, James?
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Nice talk. Honest talk. One of the things that Antoine Riard harps on, as I'm sure you remember, is this issue with some exits in layer 2 that are time sensitive, like in Lightning. There's this, sort of idea of an attack where if you can basically bribe a miner and say like, hey, I'll pay you out the funds that I'm confiscating if you just ignore, the redemption transaction that's time sensitive. Like, how do you price that risk? Like, I guess you could tack on another variable or something. Like, how much do you think about that issue?
I think about it a bit, but generally my answer is we should just make lock times longer. You look at it's a function of like the value at stake, right? So maybe usually payments are small imbalances. So I'm a little less worried about small HTLCs in like Lightning Network sense. But I would say generally I'd like security parameters longer, pick a T that's longer. Pretty much like all fraud proof kind of things fall prey to this at some level. And you're just relying on either myopic or honest miners to just take fees off the table up front, right? 1 BTC in fees now is perhaps better than 2 BTC in half a year and gradients within that, right? So there's no closed answer here. It really depends on like what the makeup of the miner scene looks like. If you have a bunch of 1% miners versus a bunch of 10% miners, all these calculations change. And so you also have to kind of think about the health of the mining industry as it pertains to that. Or you just say like, I know the miners and they don't care about this stuff. They're not going to do that to me. I mean, that's an answer too. All right.
Cool. Put your hands together. One more. You can still put your hands together though.
Take your hands
apart.
Hey, Greg, sort of non-technical question, but I'm curious around the liquidity requirements, just in your conversation talking about how much it effectively would cost to sort of exit. Have you done any research, or have you thought about from the perspective of, I'll use the phrase a sequencer, or like if you're an LSP or if you're an ASP and it's ARK, effectively how much transaction activity you would ultimately need to even justify providing that service, giving the cost to basically exit. And like, that's something that I haven't really seen like a lot of people talk about, but I'm really curious if you have thoughts on that. So
I think liquidity, I mean, it's an interesting question, but I think liquidity and exit costs are two different things. Mm-hmm. They're related as much as how you design a system might affect each point in a dependent manner. But you'd have like an ARK provider, they're fronting liquidity for a whole new tree. So like every payment, if you do an in-round payment, it'll add that much liquidity up front. Their goal is to keep their liquidity fronting as short as possible, keep the tree as young as possible, like, and kill it off early. You as a user want it as long as possible, and they're going to make you pay for that difference pretty much, right? So in Lightning, routing is kind of similar, but that's more like channel management stuff. And, you know, do you want multi-party channels and stuff like that? That's kind of another discussion too.
I see. But like in Lightning, because it is different for every system.
Sure.
But as like, you know, fee rates increase, basically the cost of capital of the Bitcoin that you have locked in the channel has to go up. So like, I guess the point is, as fee increases, it becomes harder and harder to operate some of these L2s based on how they're designed profitably if you're going to be an operator effectively. And I think that those costs can be quite high just based on how some of these systems are designed. It's, of course, going to be different for every system. But I haven't seen a lot of economic sort of modeling or scenario modeling around forecasting what that would even look like. So to me, it's sort of a question of what does it actually take to bootstrap a lot of these competing ideas? And why would anyone as an operator want to participate? So thinking about it almost in sort of like an APY sense.
Yeah. And I think it's a function of how much the customer is willing to bear and price. So the LSP can always charge for it, but who's willing to pay for what? That's an open question. In general, people don't want to pay for anything. So yeah, I know people are doing like people in the Lightning space do modeling, and I've heard various accounts, but I have nothing on hand.
I mean, in Lightning, you do need to allocate liquidity to channels without ever being really sure if people are actually going to use it, which creates kind of like this capital allocation problem. Whereas in ARK, if you lock out, it's because someone paid for it, basically. And like, sure, I mean, so it's a different problem on both. But it feels to me like you're not going to put outputs, like it's like you're not going to put up ARK outputs on chain unless you have users paying for it. Whether or not they're willing to pay for it is the question, I guess. But you don't have that problem of just like guessing where the liquidity demand is going to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, some of that can obviously be mitigated by splicing and other constructs. But yeah, if we're talking about today's systems, yeah. All right, thank you.
Cool. Now put your hands together.